Okay, Powerlifting University here, and this evening we have Mike Israetel, and Mike, you know Mike from Renaissance Periodization, I guess, and he's also a professor of science and exercise at the Temple University in Philadelphia, if I'm correct, and which means Mike knows a lot of difficult words, and he has published a book to prove it. So let's take off. Mike, does that sound about correct? Did I leave anything out? Do you have something to add?
You know, I'm really proud of how many big words I know. And I hope that the book really shows that off.
Well, I think it does. I think it does. I didn't read the whole book because it's only 371 pages or something with a lot of words. And but the book is basically, if I'm correct, divided in 7 or something powerlifting principles, right? Can you tell us a little bit about those principles and how they interact with each other?
That's right, yeah. So the book is essentially an outline. Actually, wait, can you, there's a huge echo.
Oh. I'll mute my mic, if that's okay.
Okay.
And then I'll just turn it back on when you're done. So let's try this. I'm muting now.
Okay. Blah, 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 blah. All right, sounds good. So yeah, the book. So the book is about 7 kind of fundamental principles of powerlifting training. The reason we wrote the book was because there's always been a lot of talk about different programs and which programs work the best, which programs don't work as well. And it seemed to me that comparing the programs just on, you know, their names didn't make a whole lot of sense. And after I began to learn enough about sports science, sport physiology, it seemed that there were training principles that, if applied in a certain way or applied properly or improperly, designed certain programs. So for example, if you add weight every week or so to something, to a squat, you're really applying the overload principle. If you don't add any weight and don't add any sets or any reps, you're not applying the overload principle. So you're really kind of violating it. And depending on how programs added weight or sets or reps, depending on how much they varied their exercises and a variety of other things, was really determined by these principles. So it became really kind of important to me to flesh out these principles, really describe them, describe how they apply to powerlifting training, and through that method, really make sure to communicate their structure. Because once you understand the training principles, a lot of programs become much easier to compare. Now it doesn't become a matter of 531 versus Westside. It becomes a matter of, based on my needs as an athlete or my client's needs, what sort of programming should I design based on the principles? And sometimes it could look like 531, sometimes it could look like Westside, depending on the particular situation and needs. So this is not another programming book. There are no actual programs in the book. There's a couple of guidelines on how to do the basic program writing from the principles. But so long as you follow the basics, there are multiple ways to approach a situation. Probably the biggest benefit of the book I foresee, outside of just a very good general understanding of the principles, isn't how to design the absolute best programs, but it's how to really not mess up too much and to make sure that whatever programming you're doing at least covers the basics and it's going to work really well. And I think with so many programs out there that we see people doing on social media, so I'm doing this and that program, a lot of them just don't make any damn sense, and people are really getting screwed over. So if you know the principles after reading this book, you can look at future programs that you may want to do. You might pick a better program, or you might tweak your own program to enhance its performance.
Cool, thanks. And that's something I actually really like about the book, is the fact that it is... Can you see me?
Nope.
I don't know where I went. Well, you can hear me, right?
Totally.
So cool, we'll do it like this. So you mentioned there's no programs in there, no templates, just scientific principles, which is actually, I think, a plus, because people should know how to program their own training. But you also have a hierarchy in these principles. I saw an image in there, or the table, and like specificity is all over the place. It's really overarching everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's overload, and at the very end there's individual variance.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that stuff like fatigue management and stimulus adaptation recovery is also an individual thing.
Well, every single one of these principles has its individual expressions. And do you want to turn the mic off again? Cool. Okay. That's a lot easier. It's really weird hearing an echo half a second after you talk. So each one of these principles, for example, overload, has individual variance within it. So we can say that how people respond to overload, how much overload people need, can be individually dependent. But everyone needs the basic structure of overload. There's no lifter on this earth that benefits without overload. There is no lifter on this earth that can get away with violating specificity or not managing fatigue or doesn't accumulate fatigue. That's why we chose to include individual differences as its own training principle. And this is something I was taught in my PhD courses in sport physiology, is that individual difference really does deserve its own principle title because it is a principle that modifies all of the others. So the first 6 principles are, of course, the most important because they apply to every single living human. And then individual differences just makes these tiny little changes to each one to make sure that it's applied correctly, not applied or applied a ton, just it tweaks it a little bit at the margins. So individual difference, a lot of times, it necessitates its own discussion, and then that discussion is how do you change the principles a little bit in order to apply them the best. But it's I have to be very clear on this. Individual difference is not the most important principle. I think a lot of people have this misconception, and they'll say things like, well, individual difference and individual application, individual variation, it's really the most important thing because, I know what's good for my body and I want the training to apply to me. Well, the thing is, specificity is good for everybody. Overload is good for everybody. Variation, SRA, all the other main principles are good for everyone. Everyone manages fatigue. Individual differences, it turns out, are only relatively minor in powerlifting program design. Usually, probably about half of all individual differences can be summarized in maximum recoverable volume. Two different people have 2 different max recoverable volumes. That takes care of like 50% of all differences between humans. So if you have an entire team of powerlifters, you just make sure each one gets the right kind of volume. Almost all the individual differences are out the window. Most people are going to squat, bench press, deadlift the same way. They're going to respond in a very similar way to programming. So it has to be stated that individual difference is a matter of making minor tweaks. It is not a matter of radically different programs. For example, we see some very good lifters sometimes doing some exceptional having exceptional results, and their training doesn't make any damn sense. They'll do some real dumb shit every now and again. And people will come to their defense because they're good, and nut riding is a fucking national hobby, world hobby, really. They'll say, oh, well, it works for him, right? And it's whatever works for him. Well, bullshit, that doesn't work for him, and he could be better if he didn't do such dumb stuff. So we have to remember that, that lifter, it's not like overload doesn't apply to that lifter, or SRA doesn't apply to that lifter. Oh, it applies, and he could just be messing it up and still being good in spite of that. So you got to remember that the main principles are more important than individual difference. I know it's not politically correct to say everyone's a special snowflake nowadays, but the main principles apply to everyone. You don't come to your doctor's office and go, hey, listen, I wanted to get some tests done on my heart. And the doctor says, well, we can do this echocardiogram. And you say, well, I don't know if the echo is good for me. Are you sure it's good for my heart? Yeah, motherfucker, you have a fucking heart with 4 fucking chambers just like everybody else. The echo works for every fucking heart, including frog hearts and fish hearts. So line up. The basics work for everyone. Individuals is just a tweak.
Awesome, man.
That makes sense?
It makes very much sense. And it's actually, especially personal trainers are fond of saying everybody is different and everybody needs their own specific program, which is, like you said, true to a degree.
True as far as it goes.
Exactly, which isn't very far. Well,
what? I'll tell you this really quick. Sorry to interrupt.
No
I'll tell you this. a lot of personal trainers and a lot of coaches say that they overvalue individual differences as a cover-up for the fact that they don't know anything, or they know less than they should, or less than we'd like them to know. If you do a random funky workout and your client says, now, why are we doing this? You can have a principles-based explanation of, well, we're providing a progressive overload and managing fatigue, blah, 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 but you actually have to know shit for that. Alternatively, you could say, well, it's what's right for you and your body, and they'll go, oh, well, it's so great. And they feel so special, they stop asking questions altogether. It's a cover-up.
There you go, everybody. Mike just blew the lid open.
That's right. I'm particularly cheerful today.
You are, or you aren't?
Sarcastically cheerful.
Well, and let me then ask you something else. We talked about it last time, and it's about different periodization methods and training methods, and not just training programs, but, well, maybe training programs, because on the one hand you have programs like strong lifts or 5x5, and on the other hand squat every day and training every day, high frequency training. What's your opinion on that?
So within a broad range of programming schemes, you're going to have that program is going to apply to some category of lifters very well. Usually, it's going to apply, so for example, beginner lifters in a strength phase. There are some programs that are very well designed for that particular situation. And thus, when you look up results on the internet, like, hey, I ran strong lifts 5x5, and I did really well on it, most of the people saying that are going to be the ones in that particular situation. So almost every program out there, unless it's wildly retarded, has a time and a place where it's best. But if it's a very constrained program, so for example, high frequency training really varies throughout the macrocycle in its optimal frequency, especially of presenting overloads, right? So if you present an overload throughout your training, throughout the microcycle, it's probably a good idea to do that pretty often in a hypertrophy phase and a technique development phase. Less often you present an overload, and there's more light session in the strength phase, and overload is presented very sparingly in a peaking phase. So if you have a phase, high frequency training, it's going to apply really well in hypertrophy and technical phases, but maybe not super well in peaking phases unless you alter it to some extent. So a lot of programs, what I'm saying is a lot of programs that are rather uniform in their application and design, they work very well during particular times of powerlifting prep. More complicated programs start to work well all the time because they change with the mesocycle. Something like the Juggernaut method has distinct recommendations for hypertrophy, strength, and peaking phases, as opposed to Westside, which really just kind of has one template you run all the time. So by no means, am I saying that some programs are really terrible and some programs are really awesome. More so that some programs are appropriate at some times versus others. And if you're trying to intelligently pick programs, it's a good idea to know when. Some programs are appropriate and some are not. That being said, extreme over-application of one programming style across the entire macrocycle can result in some bad things. For example, if you assume that high-frequency training is absolutely the greatest thing ever, recently there's been an uptick in how many people are doing it. A lot of beginner, intermediate lifters, especially smaller ones, love it, and they're like psycho-fanatical about how awesome it is, and everyone who's not doing high-frequency training is fucking stupid and retarded, and look at the Bulgarians, you're just lazy, and look at the Bulgarians, they're so awesome, right? So they're taking this hardline stance, and they're going to try to program high-frequency training for everybody, including 365-pound gigantic elite powerlifters that most of whom, if they tried high-frequency training, especially during the peaking phase, would probably die trying to do that or certainly get injured or burnt out or whatever. So the thing about different programming periodization styles is usually, if they're decent, they apply at various points. In order to get a style of training that applies at all points, it's going to be a very complex style. For example, if you say, so what's the Juggernaut method all about? Well, fuck, it's pretty complicated. You can just explain it in 2 sentences. You know what I mean? There's multiple phases to it. I can explain Westside in like 3 minutes. Juggernaut method, I'd have to tell you about the different phases. So there are multiple ways to skin a cat depending on what body part you're skinning it. But you don't apply the leg skinning stuff to the skinning of the head. I don't know. analogy went straight to hell.
Striation of the glutes, right?
That's right. Glute cat striation. Yeah.
Exactly. And what was it? What you said last time about beginners? How should beginners start training or pick programs?
Well, so there's a little bit of a distinction to be made between a completely new lifter and a beginner. In my qualifications, I would say 1 to 3 years of training experience is a beginner. Up until about 6 months of training, you're completely new. You're not really a beginner. So in the first 6 months of training, if your goal is to become a very good powerlifter, you mostly need to work on technique. Your loads need to be very submaximal, and you need to make sure that you are not training super frequently, because your ability to recover from training is very poorly developed. You have a really crappy work capacity, your recovery ability is real shit, you're going to get sore from everything. So in the first about 6 months or so, you're going to be training maybe twice a week in the same movements. So squatting twice a week, benching twice a week, deadlifting twice a week. And you can probably just do those movements only, and with super submaximal weights, sets of 5 to 10 at 50 or 40% of your 1 rep max, to get the technique down really well. And the best way to do this is with a coach. For some reason, everyone nowadays lifts through YouTube and stuff like that, and they don't have a coach, which is why we see so much fucking total garbage technique going on. Get a coach, have them teach you the lifts for the first 6 months. You know, in Olympic weightlifting, this has been an accepted standard for maybe 60 years. When you get junior lifters that are just starting, you let them play around with a bar and just like the dummy plates for like months before you let them go heavy, because you're trying to teach them technique. Once you're doing that, their work capacity is higher. Beginners, probably 1 to 3 years, respond best to mostly hypertrophy phases, because that's where they're going to get most of the results. Hypertrophy is such a powerful response in beginners that they can get stronger just by putting on more muscle. They don't even need the neural adaptations anymore, because they can put on muscle so quickly that even their 1 repetition max goes up. Right? If you put on 10 pounds of muscle, even if you're doing sets of 10, your 1RM is going to go up. That's 10 pounds of contractile tissue. And also, because their technique isn't super ingrained yet, they benefit from higher frequency training, not just because it promotes more hypertrophy, but also because it promotes more technical development. You don't establish good technique by squatting once a week. You establish good technique by squatting maybe 4 to 6 times a week. Squats, 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 benches, 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 deadlifts, 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 always perfect technique, mostly submaximal load. So a good periodization scheme for a beginner is maybe 3 or 4 months of a hypertrophy phase, 2 or 3 weeks of a strength phase, 1 week of peaking, and then do a first meet or something like that. And then as the lifter progresses, their strength phases are going to get longer, and eventually when they reach advanced elite status, their peaking phases are going to get longer, and their hypertrophy phases are going to shrink as they fill.
We're recording again. Take 2, we had some technical difficulties. I don't even remember what we were talking about high frequency training and low frequency training, low volume, high volume.
So the differences in programming is, so when you have a program that favors a type of approach, usually that means that program is going to favor a certain type of lifter at a certain time. And it's a good idea to make sure you understand which programs work best where, which is something the book really, really beats to death, and that you don't stick to one programming style. A proper periodized protocol is an arrangement of multiple different programming styles over the course of a powerlifting prep macro cycle. So the high-frequency training works much better at the beginning of a macro cycle than it does at the end. It works much better for beginners than it does for advanced lifters. And you can modify high-frequency training so that it works for everyone, but then it's not really much. It doesn't look much like high-frequency training anymore. Something like, for example, the Norwegians, I believe, do. You know, they train all the time, but they don't go heavy all the time.
Exactly.
So high-frequency training and high-frequency overload training are 2 completely different things. And that's got to be really, really, really cleared up.
Yeah, but what about DUP? I mean, daily undulating periodization. I thought I could just, put in my shoe size, height, weight, and it gives me a program, right? Or is that not? Is it something else what I'm talking about?
There's certainly intra-microcycle variation of volume loads promotes the ability to present a bigger stimulus and recovery adaptation. So DUP works because of the understanding that some sessions need to be very hard to prevent an overload, and some sessions need to allow you to still practice your technique and recover while providing a maintenance level of stimulus and to allow you to recover so you can later provide another overload. That's why DUP works for the most part. DUP doesn't work because you're training multiple fitness characteristics at the same time. It's actually a negative of extreme DUP. So if you think you can grow muscle and get stronger in the same week, that's true, but you could do a whole lot more of both if you took a separate months to do them in, and they actually potentiate each other quite well. So DUP in a non-extreme form, let's say sets of 6 one day, sets of 4 another day, sets of 2 another day, is totally fine. And that's how most of the best programs are written. DUP in an extreme sense, where you do sets of 15 one day, sets of 5 for strength another day, and then later in the week you do sets of 2 for what they call power, which isn't power at all. There's no high velocity component. Then you end up getting a whole lot of average. And it's a fine way to train, but probably not the best way to train. So, DUP is maturing now. It's becoming more controlled in its alterations in volume load within the week, and thus there's very effective ways to undulate the intra-microcycle load. I don't like the term at all because technically it's not a form of periodization, it's a form of programming. Mm-hmm. In the sports science community, DUP was born out of the exercise science community. Sports scientists don't really admit the term much. They're not really interested in it.
Cool, interesting.
And sports scientists have known about intramicrocycle variations in volume load for, 40 years or something. DUP is comparing itself to something nobody has done since 1955, which is a pure linear program. I'm not sure I've ever seen a pure linear program actually written. So I'm not entirely sure. So DUP was kind of born from exercise science, and they're like, wow, look, we can alter within a microcycle, we can alter volume loads. And sports scientists were like, yeah, well, we know that. We've been doing that for years. But a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, this is better than linear periodization. Well, there's no such thing as linear periodization. And anything remotely like it died in 1955. So DUP is great, but you got to make sure you don't take it to the extremes. If you're doing sets of 15 and sets of 3 in the same week, you're not really getting the best of either one of those worlds anymore.
And it's really interesting you're saying this. I think, or I bet a lot of people are now thinking, hey, Mike is just describing block periodization now. We have a hypertrophy block, between quotes, then we have a strength block, and then we might have a peaking block. Is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah. So block periodization is, again, a little bit of an outdated term. What we have today is called modern periodization, or just periodization. A modern periodization has structural elements on the mesocycle length, which are called blocks. It has elements on the microcycle length, and there are some daily undulations there. It has progressive elements on the mesocycle length, which is an element of linearity. So, for example, people say, I'm against linear periodization, or I'm against linear progression. And you ask them, so you don't actually increase your intensities as the weeks go on?
Or as the years go on?
Right. So it's like, well, I do it non-linearly. Well, okay, so has every sports scientist since 1972. Right? So it's like a lot of people in powerlifting seem to make these big discoveries that aren't really discoveries at all. So when people say, oh, you're a block periodization guy. No, I'm a periodization guy. And if you don't use block structure and periodization, you're outdated by at least 40 years. Louis Simmons, for example, with Westside, I mean, laughably outdated. Effective, but not nearly as it could have been. And you say, oh, Westside's such an effective system. Yeah, how many weightlifting programs use Westside? How many sprinting programs use Westside? How many bobsled programs use Westside? I mean, 0, right?
Well, I don't know, Mike. I mean, I know... I don't know for a fact. I just know that Louis Simmons says he trained a gold medalist sprinter and NFL teams and UFC guys, and they are the strongest gym in the world. What about that?
Sure. I'm not going to get into the strongest gym in the world thing. That's absurd.
Damn it.
The Lillibridges probably have something to say about that. But, so I will say this. Do you know who Brad Dewey is?
No, I'm sorry.
And nobody really knows who Brad Dewey is. Brad Dewey was the head strength and conditioning coach at one of the U.S. Olympic training centers that we have for winter sports and for sprinting and weightlifting. in Lake Placid, New York, and he was there for multiple years. Brad Dewey's, his personal programming led to something like several dozen gold medals and God knows how many silver and bronze medals for his athletes. How come? So it's objectively more impressive than Louis Simmons by a long shot. How come nobody's ever heard of him? Well, Brad's not a marketing guy. He's not a PR guy. He's now a professor at East Tennessee State. He teaches courses. He does some interviews every now and again, but he just uses modern periodization. He doesn't use the Dewey's method. So we got to remember that, you think Louis Simmons is impressive. He's a very impressive coach with lots of impressive accomplishments. But a lot of people who don't have the same sort of fanfare have multiple accolades. There's guys in China running modern periodization that you've never heard of. We can't pronounce their names, but they have like 100 gold medalists under their wing. Like, well, fuck, I want to know what that guy has to say. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If only he spoke English, right?
Of course. Well, there's lots of guys in Europe. West Germany, or formerly West Germany, now unified Germany, has had unbelievable sports scientists and sport coaches, and interestingly enough, modern Germany is actually pretty low on the drug use, and they still produce champions. And their sports science is top notch. And you just won't hear a lot about these guys because they don't usually work in powerlifting. They work in weightlifting, sprinting, bobsled, throwing, and a lot of people just don't read about that kind of stuff much. So when we talk about these guru coaches that have produced these incredible results with their own methods of periodization, if you look at all sports, all strength sports taken together, modern periodization with block elements and undulating elements has been the industry standard for 30 years or something like that.
Cool. Thanks. That's really awesome. And to be sure, all those coaches are, of course, using the principles from your book because
they learned from me. I taught them
exactly.
most of those principles.
You have successful Skype calls with these guys and successful Google Hangouts with no errors.
That's right. That's right. I mean, in reality, it's completely backwards. These coaches learned these principles by discovering them and by talking to their sports scientists. Their sports scientists wrote multiple textbooks and published research studies, and from that, I have collected these principles. So, in fact, I have learned from all of those other people.
Cool. Yeah, I really feel everybody should check out your book. Like I said, I did not finish reading it yet, but I started, and it's very impressive. I needed to brush up my English too for quite a bit there, but no problem for me. Where can people go if they want to check it out, the book?
Juggernaut Training Systems, JTS website. Just Google Juggernaut Training Systems, and you'll be right there. And there's a bunch of links to the book. It's a really long books, 373 pages, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
Got
hey, but
cool...
that's pictures of hot chicks in there, I saw. So
there are a couple of hot chicks. Chad Wesley Smith is in there a lot. He's pretty hot.
For a chick, he is.
And then, there's lots of, there's some really cool graphs and charts that I made that I'm very proud of. And they kind of illustrate visually a lot of these somewhat complicated concepts. The good thing about this book, or one of the things about this book, is that it doesn't spare any expense with complexity. It is complicated. But at the same time, the very important but difficult concepts are restated multiple times throughout the book and kind of woven together, so that at the end of the book, you probably get a pretty decent idea of what the most important stuff means. Greg Nuckols has called it sort of a textbook type of book. And it definitely is. It's not, it's an entertaining read, but a lot of it is really meat and potatoes, pretty dry stuff. But hey, man, you want to learn how to program and you want to learn the principles. There's going to be some science in there. We can't. I'll tell you, there's one thing that the book completely lacks is hype. We don't have any. There's nothing there that's super exciting. But you're going to finish the book and think about it some, and hopefully get an idea like, oh wow, man, I can really more prepared to analyze programs to see if they're good or not. I'm really more prepared to write my own programs, even, perhaps.
Yeah, and that for me is like the biggest benefit of the whole book. I mean, that's what programming is about, right? I mean, everybody plateaus on a strength training program and then they hop from one to another doing something completely different. And I think that's what you said last time we spoke, and that's fine if you're just discovering strength training and are not sure what works or what doesn't work. But once you're past that stage, I think this book will definitely help people out.
Totally. In this book, we also say it's for the thinking lifter. It's not for the beginning lifter. If you have just started lifting 2 weeks ago, don't read this. Greg Nuckols has 2 books, The Science of Lifting and The Art of Lifting. They're way
Yes,
better for beginners.
they
Um,
are very
but
good too.
once they're phenomenal books, and once you have read those, and once you've been lifting maybe for at least 6 months or a year, if you really want some deep science, then you can dive into this book. And like you said, one of the most painful possibilities in powerlifting is to not be progressing and not know why you're not progressing.
Exactly.
To look through a possibility of doing multiple programs. You say you had a meet that didn't go as well as you had planned, and it wasn't like you bombed out or something weird or you hurt yourself. It was just simply your performance hasn't been improving nearly as much as you thought it would. And you look around and you say, which program am I going to do next? And you get this feeling, and I've been there, and you get this feeling of total emptiness and confusion and kind of despair, where you're like, I have no fucking clue what's going on. I could go one way or I could go another way. This book is to give you a fucking clue of what's going on. It's to kind of calm the waters, illustrate these principles, and you go, oh man, well, since I am trying to move up a weight class, maybe more hypertrophy training is what I need, and I know I'm worse at the bottom of my squat, so maybe quad training is what I need. It'll put the program, you can put the program together, or you can select a program that you think most appropriate for your needs at the time, and then you'll get predictable, slow and steady gains, hopefully. It's, I think, much better than have no idea what's going on. That's a really scary thing.
It is, yeah, it is, and I couldn't have said it better. And that's why you wrote the book, of course, and not me. Mike, before the connection drops again or whatever, is it okay if we go over the questions from our viewers?
Sure.
It's the same as last time, so I hope you
Okay.
are giving me the same answers.
Oh, geez, I hope so.
The first one is from Adam Ali, Physiconomics. If you could only do 3 exercises for the rest of your lives, what would they be?
Yeah, man, I think I explained last time that I was very frustrated with that question, because why just 3? So I guess posterior chain movement of some kind, a deadlift, stiff-legged deadlift, squat, high bar squat with my weightlifting shoes. That's my single favorite exercise. And pull up or a bent over row variety of some kind pretty much takes care of your whole body. If I wanted to get picky, I'd pick 4 exercises, but I think basically, good God, squat, deadlift, bent row / pull up, and then if I could squeeze a 4th in there, it would be some kind of vertical incline pressing movement. Damn it, why 3?
Oh yeah, because he's an asshole.
That's right.
I didn't say it out loud, I hope. And I want to ask you another question from Johnny, and we talked about last time. It's the guy who had surgery, and he was asking you what the best way is to start up training again. Does he go in, set 1RMs in the next 2 weeks, or use a 1RM calculator?
Yeah, totally. I remember that. So I think I've actually spoken with Johnny a little bit about this in private messenger, but after surgery, it's very important to start off incredibly easy and slow, because 2 reasons. One, you don't want to fuck up the surgery and fuck up your healing, most importantly. And secondly, you're going to be out of the loop. I think he's out of the loop for a couple of months, and then he can get back into training. He's going to be so sensitized to adaptive response, to hypertrophy strength, etc., that the very bare minimum of anything will add muscle and strength. So what he should do is train once in the first week coming back with what he thinks he can do 20 times. He should do it for a couple of sets of 10. And the next week, do maybe 1 set of 10 the first week, 2 sets of 10 the second week. The third week, he can add another exercise session of 2 sets of 10, and then slowly work up in sets, slowly work up in frequency, and very slowly work up in weight. And eventually, after a couple of months, he'll be back to his old self or something similar, and then he can start using 1RM calculators. But I would not use 1RM calculators at first. You have to go by feel, which is very weird for me to say because it's usually wrong, right? But after surgery is one of those times you got to go super light, super easy. You're going to get super sore from training the first time you do it, so you got to take enough time to rest and recover and relax, and super ease into it, because the mistake of going too slow will cost you a month of results. The mistake of going too fast can cost you a career, or it could cost you 2 years of results. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So better safe than sorry in this case.
Excellent, man. I hope Johnny gets a lot out of this answer. Well, you spoke to him private messages, so
He
hopefully
better.
he's already back in the gym,
I will be
taking it easy.
charging all of these people that ask questions. I am sending them PayPal invoices.
How much?
$500? No, not
Yeah,
a big
exactly.
deal.
Not a big deal, exactly.
Yeah,
For a life-changing answer, for
that's right.
information that is really insider and
Super insider.
super, super duper. You will open up the curtain or pull back the curtain and only $500. It's a steal.
That's right. It really is unfair for me to charge such low prices, but you know, that's just me, man.
Yeah, you're a giver.
Yes.
Okay, and I've got 2 more questions. One is from Mike Dula, and he was asking, sometimes it's just not clear why you are weak in a certain lift. Why are you weak in the bottom of a squat? Is it technique? Is it quads? What is it? How do you tell?
Yeah. Very straightforward answer I think I gave this last time, and I was talking to a friend of mine, Shannon Green from Australia, and we had this very productive talk. So there's 2 possible main reasons outside of like, okay, if you have neuropathology, you need to go to a doctor. Or if your glutes, this is one of my biggest pet peeves is I can't fire my glutes. Unless you're very ill and you have a degenerative nerve disease or nerve blockage, if there's a fucking bone where your nerve's supposed to be, you don't have trouble firing glutes. You just have small fucking weak pathetic glutes, or your technique sucks. All right. So there's 2 ways to address a problem in a particular portion of a lift. So number 1, is your technique the limiting factor? So is it that you're not pushing through your heels like your coach has been telling you? Is it that you don't have a coach to tell you to push through your heels? The way you fix technique is you can send your videos to a good coach, or even better, have them in life and have them look at your technique, hopefully for multiple sessions, maybe even a while. If there's always good powerlifters around in every city pretty much in the world, so make a point to go out there and see them, maybe pay them a little bit of personal training money, and say, listen, I want you to take a look at my squat and help me with my squat technique. And after several weeks, they're probably going to teach you how to use your body better and make a bunch of progress, right? In the bench press, if you're not arching or retracting properly, you can be leaving 20, 30 kilos on the bench every single time.
Yeah.
So technique matters a ton. The second way to analyze deficiencies in a part of a lift is to look at assistance lifts that are responsible for more of the muscles and movements of that part of the lift, and see if they compare to other standards that you know about for people who are about as strong as you. So for example, if you can bench 200 kilos and you know a bunch of other guys in your gym or your crew or guys on the internet that you're friends with that can bench 200 kilos, and you know that you have a real hard time at lockout, look at what you can close grip or what you can shoulder press or you can skull crush, right? And compare those values to theirs and say, well, man, I can only close grip 150 kilos for a set of 5. What can you do, other 200 kilo bencher? And he's going to be like, well, man, I've done 175 for 5. Fuck. Well, fuck, my close grip bench is 25 kilos off. Of course I'm going to have trouble locking out. Now, if it just turns out your close grip was just right on the money, maybe even better than other guys who can bench 200 kilos, but you still have trouble with lockout, then it's almost certainly a technical issue, and then you need a powerlifting coach.
Cool. Thanks for answering that.
Sure.
Last question then. How long would somebody's arms need to be to give you a proper bear hug?
Jesus Christ.
That's the one we're finishing with, Mike. I'm sorry.
Awesome. I have no idea. Interestingly enough, people the chest measurements they give, like, oh, I have you watch World's Strongest Man on TV and he's got a 50-inch chest or some shit.
Exactly.
I have no idea how big my fucking chest is. I'm definitely too big to measure my own chest. I can't wrap anything around my own body. I'll tell you this.
Wait a minute. Let me be clear. So you're a bodybuilder also who doesn't know how big his chest is, right?
Yep. I would guarantee you almost all American bodybuilders have no idea how big their chests are.
Oh, really?
There's only one measurement American bodybuilders know. It's their arms, and that's it. I'm serious. Some of them might know
Awesome.
their waists, and that's about where it comes to an end. So I have no idea how big my chest is, but I'll tell you this. So for whoever asked that, for the next little while, I'm still living in Kansas City before I move to Philadelphia. Kansas City Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is where I do Jiu-Jitsu. Come on down, and we'll bear hug.
That's a challenge.
It's not a challenge. It's a warm and friendly invitation for the kind of
Ah,
air hugging that we do at Jiu-Jitsu. There's lots of hugging. It's all hugging, really.
well, that's what it is, right?
That's
It's
it.
okay.
That's right.
Well, Mike, thanks. I want to wrap it up. Thanks for bearing with me through all the technical difficulties. People should go to jtsstrength.com for your book and visit renaissanceperiodization.com if they are interested in services you and your team provide, right? Like
Yes,
online
absolutely.
coaching, diet advice, diet templates, not training templates, right? Just diet templates.
That's right. We're working on the powerlifting training templates. I actually have them in my lab, and we're testing them out a little bit. We're not just going to push out something that doesn't work. Oops. So those are in development, but we've got diet templates that work really well. If you train once a day, if you train twice a day, we have templates for you. Come on down. I feel like a carnival clown promoter. Come on down. We've got templates for everybody. But so we have coaching and templates and some blog posts and stuff. Renaissance Periodization. Plenty of pictures of me. That's why I go.
Awesome. And you're also on Facebook, Instagram. People just need to look it up, Google it, and
That's right.
connect.
Come see us on social media.
Cool. Thanks for talking, Mike.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Same to you.
All right. Take